The number one truth married men hide from women they desire. Why does a married man look at you differently but never say what he really thinks? Why does he make elaborate excuses to be close but never admit the obvious? There is a truth so deep, so disturbing, that committed men keep it as a nuclear secret. It's not about sex. It's not about physical betrayal. It is something much more complex and psychologically devastating. Imagine discovering that behind that polite smile, those innocent conversations, there is an emotional abyss that he can't even name. A need so primitive that it makes him question everything he has built. That truth isn't in the obvious gestures. It's in the awkward silence, the stare that lasts 2 seconds longer, the way he changes the subject when you get closer. What you'll discover here will completely change your perception of male desire, marriage, and that inexplicable tension that hangs in the air. Get ready, because this truth is not comfortable. 1. The void that no wife can fill. There is something disturbing going on inside a married man's mind when he is attracted to another woman. It's not just physical desire. It's the sudden realization that there's a completely dormant part of him, a version of himself that's been buried under years of routine, responsibilities, and predictability. When he looks at you, he's not just seeing an attractive person. He is seeing a mirror reflecting all that he has ceased to be. This emptiness has a name. It is the death of spontaneity. At the wedding, he became a fixed character. The provider, the father, the reliable husband. Each role came with a defined script, and little by little he forgot that there was someone behind these masks. The wife knows this character so well that there is no more room for surprises, for contradictions, for that unpredictable version of him that was once interesting. You represent something completely different. In your presence, he doesn't have to be the man everyone expects. It can be mysterious again. It can create a new narrative about yourself. This emptiness he feels is not the wife's fault, but rather the consequence of a dynamic where intimacy has become extreme familiarity. And familiarity has killed the mystery. With you, he can rebuild his own image. Be seen with fresh eyes, without the weight of accumulated disappointments. The cruelest thing is that this emotional hole is invisible to him until the moment someone like you appears. Suddenly, he realizes that he is living a lifetime on autopilot. The conversations at home are about bills, children, practical problems. No one asks about your dreams, your fears, your philosophies of life anymore. You, unknowingly, offer the possibility for him to reconnect with forgotten layers of his own identity, and therein lies the danger. He begins to believe that you are the solution to this emptiness, when in fact you are just the symptom of something much bigger. The truth he hides is simple. It's not you he wants, it's the feeling of being alive again. It is to rediscover that there is a man behind the husband, and that this man is desperate for recognition. 2. When admiration turns into silent obsession. At first, it's just admiration. He notices your intelligence, your way of speaking, how you move through the world with a confidence that feels natural. Nothing much, just recognition of genuine qualities. But something insidious begins to happen. This admiration takes up more and more mental space until he realizes that he is thinking about you at completely random times. In traffic, during meetings, before bed. This transition from admiration to obsession happens quietly because he can never admit it out loud. It would be to confess an emotional betrayal, to assume that there is someone occupying a mental territory that should be exclusive to the wife. So he keeps everything internally, and that only intensifies the process. The more you repress, the stronger the psychological presence you exert on him. The mechanism is simple. Prohibition feeds desire. Since he can't act, His mind compensates by creating elaborate scenarios, imaginary conversations where he finally says what he thinks, hypothetical situations where the two of you are in different contexts without the social ties that exist now. He begins to build an idealized version of you, filling in the gaps with projections of what he most wants to find. The obsession manifests itself in small details that only he perceives. It memorizes insignificant things that you mention. Pay attention to their schedules, their standards, their preferences, not consciously and planned, but as an automatic reflection of a mind that is constantly tuned into your frequency. It's as if there's an internal radar that goes off whenever you're around or when something reminds you of you. The silence of this obsession is deafening. He can't share with friends, he can't sue with his wife, he can't even fully admit to himself the intensity of what he feels. This secret becomes a weight that he carries alone, fueling the fantasy even more. You become the only private thought that belongs exclusively to him, a mental refuge where no one else has access. And the more time passes, the more difficult it becomes to separate the real person from the idealization he has built. If you want to know the number one truth married men hide from the women they secretly desire, and why you keep getting caught in their emotional shadow, the Jung method is pinned in the first comment. 3. The projection. You as a symbol of what he lost. Here's the hardest truth to swallow. You're not really you to him. It is a symbol, a living repository of everything he gave up when he chose stability. When he looks at you, he is seeing lost youth, unexplored possibilities, alternative versions of life itself that have fallen by the wayside. Every quality of his becomes a painful reminder of something he sacrificed. This projection happens unconsciously and is extremely powerful. If you're spontaneous, it projects all the freedom you've lost. If she is ambitious, she projects the professional dreams she abandoned. If it is mysterious, it projects the adventure that it has ceased to live. It doesn't matter who you really are, because he's using you as a blank canvas to paint his regrets and repressed desires. The marriage required a series of symbolic deaths from him. The adventurous boy who traveled without plans has died. The dreamer who wanted to change careers has died. The man who believed in overwhelming passions has died. Every death was necessary. Every sacrifice made sense at the time. But something strange happens when someone appears who seems to embody everything he has killed within himself. Suddenly, these ghosts wake up. You become the embodiment of an untraveled road. He begins to imagine what life would be like if he had made different choices. And the cruelest thing is that this fantasy will always be more seductive than reality, because it does not carry the weight of consequences, of daily difficulties, of inevitable conflicts. In his imagination, you represent a life without the problems he faces now. This projection is unfair to both you and your wife. You are being used as a symbolic object, not recognized as a real person with flaws and complexities. And the wife is being compared to an impossible fantasy, competing with an idealized version that never existed. He hides this truth because to admit it would be to recognize that the problem is not in the people around him, but in the way he deals with his own choices and losses. It would be assuming that he is projecting his inner demons onto you, and that the desire he feels is more about himself than about anything you really are. 4. Because he will never confess, even if he wants to. The confession would be the total collapse of the structure he built. We are not just talking about a marriage, but an entire identity. He is known as a faithful man, a present father, a serious professional. To admit attraction to you would be to pull the thread that undoes all this tapestry. That's why he'd rather live in unresolved tension than risk that brutal honesty. There is also the paralyzing fear of rejection. In fantasy, you can correspond. You can validate everything he feels. But confessing means testing reality. and reality can be devastating. What if you get uncomfortable? What if you look at him with pity or repulsion? This possibility is so terrifying that he prefers to keep everything in the realm of imagination, where he has total control over the outcome. Another factor is the weight of guilt. Married men who feel attraction outside of marriage carry complex and contradictory guilt. On the one hand, they know that feelings are not crimes. On the other hand, they were taught that real men do not get carried away by these weaknesses. To confess would be to admit moral failure. It would be to recognize that he is not as strong as he imagined, that the vows he made were not enough to shield his mind against other possibilities. There is also the awareness of the practical consequences. A confession can destroy the marriage, affect the children, implode the financial structure, tarnish the social reputation. Even if he is unhappy, even if the attraction is overwhelming, these concrete consequences outweigh any romantic impulse. This is where rationality wins over desire, creating an emotional prison where he is trapped between wanting and not being able to. And there's something even deeper. Confessing would be forcing him to make a decision. As long as he maintains silence, he can live in comfortable ambiguity. You can stay married while feeding the fantasy about you. You can have security and excitement at the same time, even if it is only in the mental field. Confession would put an end to this duality. It would force you to choose, and to choose means to lose something anyway. That's why he will never say what he really feels. It will leave clues. It will create ambiguous situations. It will test the limits without ever crossing them definitively. Because while nothing is said, everything is still possible in his head. Silence is not weakness. It is an emotional survival strategy. It is the way he found to maintain two simultaneous worlds without having to destroy either of them. 5. The dangerous game of controlled proximity. He develops a disturbing ability, staying close enough to fuel the connection, but far enough away to maintain innocence. It's a calculated game where every move feels casual, but it's actually carefully orchestrated. He creates professional excuses to talk, finds legitimate reasons to be in the same room, manufactures coincidences that are not coincidences. This controlled proximity serves two purposes. First, it satisfies his need to be close to you, to feel that electricity that comes when you interact. Second, it keeps everything within socially acceptable limits, allowing him to deny any intent if anyone questions it. He is brilliant and cowardly at the same time. Notice the details. He always has time for you, but never too much time. The conversations are long, but always in public places or professional contexts. He shows genuine interest in your life, asks personal questions, but always frames everything as friendship or collegiality. It's an elaborate dance where he moves forward 2 steps and steps back 1, keeping you always slightly confused about his real intentions. The expertise is in never giving concrete reasons for accusation. If you confront him, he has perfect escape. It was just talk, it was just work, it was just education. You are the one who is misinterpreting. This smooth gaslighting is an essential part of the game because it protects it from any liability while allowing it to continue fueling the dynamics. But there is a psychological cost to all this. Keeping this closeness controlled requires constant mental energy. He needs to monitor every word, every gesture, every look. It needs to look natural while being extremely calculating. You need to show interest without showing too much interest. It's exhausting, but addiction is stronger than tiredness. This strategy also creates an implicit sexual tension that never resolves. The more time you spend in this game, the more intense the energy between you becomes. It's like charging a battery that never completely discharges. Each encounter adds more voltage until the mere presence of each other becomes electrifying. And he loves that feeling because it's the only part of his life that's still unpredictable. The real danger is not in what can happen, but in what is happening. This controlled closeness undermines the emotional structure of his marriage. Every moment he spends with you is a moment where he is not invested in the relationship he has. Every thought about you is a thought subtracted from the wife. He's living an emotional double life, and that doesn't sustain forever. 6. The fantasy that feeds dead marriage. Here's the most disturbing paradox. The fantasy about you may be keeping his marriage alive. It sounds contradictory, but that's exactly how it works. He can endure the domestic routine, the repetitive arguments, the lack of passion, because he has you as a mental outlet. It's as if you are the emotional fuel that allows him to continue functioning in the role of husband. Think about it. If you disappeared from his life tomorrow, the marriage wouldn't improve. On the contrary, he would be face to face with the real emptiness of the relationship without any distractions to alleviate. The fantasy works as anesthesia, allowing him to tolerate a situation that would otherwise be unbearable. You are both a threat and a lifeline to his marriage. This dynamic creates a bizarre psychological dependency. He needs you there, orbiting his life to feel alive. But it can't really have you, because that would destroy the structure that fantasy is sustaining. It's an impossible balance where he wants everything to remain exactly as it is, married, but with you available on the emotional horizon. The wife often realizes that something has changed, but she can't identify what. He is more tolerant at home, less irritated by the little things. She may even think that the marriage has improved. He does not realize that the improvement is the result of a disguised emotional betrayal, of an energy that he is seeking outside and bringing inside as fuel. The cruelest thing is that this fantasy prevents any possibility of real change. If the marriage is bad, the way would be either to genuinely improve it or to end it. But he does neither one nor the other, because the fantasy about you offers a comfortable third option, to remain in mediocrity, sustained by daydreams. It is a kind of frozen infidelity, where nothing changes, but nothing is resolved either. And there's more. This costume gets more and more elaborate over time. It creates whole versions of imaginary relationships with you. Imagine deep conversations that you never had. It projects compatibilities that have never been tested. He builds a complete parallel life that exists only in his head. And the more sophisticated this fantasy becomes, the more difficult it is for him to deal with real people, including his wife. The truth he'll never admit is that he's using you, not maliciously, but functionally. You are his emotional survival tool. It's what allows him to wake up every day and continue living a life that no longer satisfies him. And the scariest thing is that he can maintain this indefinitely, for years on end, without ever having to confront the reality of his own marriage or his own feelings. 7. Desire versus need. The male confusion. He can't differentiate if he wants you or if he needs you. It seems the same thing, but the difference is abysmal. Desire is about attraction, chemistry, the desire for closeness. Necessity is about filling voids, escaping pain, finding meaning. The problem is that these two things are completely scrambled in his head, creating an emotional confusion that even he can't untangle. When he thinks of you, what exactly are he feeling? Attraction to the person you are, or desperate need for something that his life no longer offers? Many married men experience this confusion without ever trying to understand it. They simply label everything as desire and move on, without questioning the deeper layers of what they are feeling. Necessity masquerades as desire because it's less scary to admit you want someone than it is to admit you're desperate for salvation. Recognizing need is recognizing fragility. It is assuming that there is something deeply wrong in the emotional structure of your life. So he transforms everything into physical attraction, into inexplicable chemistry, into special connection. Anything but face the truth that you're drowning and looking for a lifeline. This confusion has practical consequences. If it was just desire, he could eventually control it, direct it to someone else, or just let it go. But necessity does not pass. Need deepens over time. And since he is not dealing with the root of the problem, only medicating symptoms with his presence, the situation only gets worse. You become more and more essential in his emotional economy. There are signs that denounce when it is a need disguised as desire. If he seeks you, especially in moments of crisis, sadness, questioning, it is necessary. If you think of yourself as a solution to problems that are not even related to relationships,